Paul, welcome to another episode of the Hemlane Hustle. I am so excited for you to be our guest today, in part because I think a lot of our listeners are going to look at you, your portfolio, and say, wow, how did Paul get there? And what
Hmm.
actually got you into real estate investing? So with that, I would like to introduce you all to Paul David Thompson. He's a real estate investor out in Little Rock, Arkansas. He has over 40 rental properties that he owns and has also done syndication out of state in Texas. So, with that, Paul, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. This is gonna be fun.
Great. Well, I want to start with your background and back all the way to college because you have an engineering degree. For
Hmm.
us in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, that's probably the most highly sought after degree and someone you'd want to work into technology. But
Hmm.
you decided to go into real estate investing instead. Walk us
Hmm.
through why, how you got into it.
Yeah, so I was raised in a fairly low income family. I mean, we never went hungry, but like I didn't have a free ride to college. So I was like, I need to figure out a way to change my socioeconomic status. So I thought, what else would be better than becoming an engineer and having a marketable skill set? I was naturally pretty good and comfortable with math and science. So I thought, well, why not engineering? And then I thought, well, it was the year in 1996 to age myself, graduating high school. And I was like, well, I don't know what all these engineering disciplines are, but I know what computers are. And there goes the computer engineering professor. So I'll just check out what they're talking about. And that's how I chose my my degree path. So, I mean, when you're 18 years old, you just don't really know what you're talking about. You just sometimes you get lucky. In that case, I got lucky. And then after graduating, I was able to, I was making like $45,000 a year in the year 2000 in Arkansas, which was a respectable income at the time. And it was certainly more than I ever would had a chance of making really with most any other profession with only getting a 4-year degree. And so I just kind of settled into my life of working a corporate job, and I just kind of felt like I was facing this 40-year work span. It was like, is this really what I signed up for? It was like, there's got to be a better way, but I couldn't think of anything. And it took me about 15 years in that corporate career before I had kind of a wake up call moment that I realized this is not for me anymore. I've got to find something else where I'm not exchanging my time for money anymore. I was making good money, but all my time was gone. And I was not having enough time to spend with my wife and kids. So I thought I needed to find something else to replace my income. And real estate was the first experiment that I ran, and I'm still running experiments.
Great. Now, let's talk about that because usually what I've seen with some of the most successful real estate investors is that they start they have this vision like 5 to 10 years ahead where they
Yep.
say, I either need to buy and sell a company enough to go and buy 10 rental properties,
Yep.
or I need to save every single dollar and say, here's my real estate fund to go invest in real estate. And
Hmm.
every year I'm going to make sure to put this away so that I can get the next down payment, the next down payment. So
Hmm.
for you, because this was kind of a not a rush decision, but a decision you made after some time
Right.
and kind of that switch flipped, how did you do that from a capital perspective of getting the money and then purchasing properties in Little Rock?
Yeah, so I put away about 30 to $50,000. I can't remember exactly the number, but it was something around that of investable cash that I could put towards something. I had money in my retirement accounts, but I couldn't easily tap into those without, penalties or, early withdrawal taxes, or that money was kind of trapped. I couldn't go and just deploy it and make money for my lifestyle now. So I just had 30, $50,000, and was like, what am I going to do? And so I did a lot of studying and figured out that there's this concept called the Burr method, right? Where you buy a distressed asset well below its market value, you get it fixed up, you rehab it, and you rent it out to in the market rent. So you've put the nice finish on it so that you get the
Mhm.
most you can out of that given asset class, and then you refinance it and pull most, if not all, of your money back out, and then you repeat the process. And that's the Burr method. And I did that once with a very small property as an experiment. I raised private money from a third party person who had retired. She
And
had some money
how did you find that person
through
to
bigger
the and
pockets.
how through bigger pockets? Okay, and how did you know that they were trustworthy?
Good question. We had lunch a few times.
Okay,
She lived about an hour away from me. She was retired. She lived in California as and was a chemical engineer. She retired to Hot Springs, Arkansas, and she was just a gem. I mean, she's still an amazing person that I talk to frequently. And uh, really, I think, like, how did she know to trust me? Because, I was the one borrowing the money, right?
yeah, you're borrowing the money. Totally, totally.
Yeah. And it was a $30,000 note. So I bought this property for, I think, like $31,000. I borrowed 30 from her. And so she funded, nearly all of it. And then I put $10,000 of my own money into the rehab.
Okay,
And that was the first purchase. This is 2015. So the property's value at the time after being fixed up was about $55,000. So I did a refinance and pulled out about 40 grand, paid her back, paid back my own cash, and was renting it for 650 bucks. So in the scheme of things, after it's all said and done, I was probably making $100 per month in cash flow. Not going to change your life, but I had no money in it anymore. So I had an asset with fixed debt and a renter that's paying all of my expenses. And I still have that house today. I mean, it's now been 8 or 9 years since then, and I
yeah.
I still I still have that same property, and it's halfway paid down. And so that property was a proof of concept for me. That's like, you know what, this can work. Let me do this again. And then I ended up buying about one property a month for the next 24 months.
I was gonna say if this was 2015 and now you're up to over 40 properties, you were making sure to have a plan to purchase consistently.
Mhm.
Now, did you still have your corporate job at this time, or had you left your job?
No, I still had a job. This was my proof of concept to see if leaving the corporate world using real estate was a viable thing. And what I did is I created kind of a 3 to 5 year exit plan that if I bought 100 properties over the next 5 years,
Uh-huh.
and with $125 per month in income, that would replace my income. I kind of did the math, kind of worked my way back.
Yeah.
And along that process, I realized that I don't really want to own and manage 100 properties. And I found out, and what you guys, could have helped me with if I knew you existed, was property management's
Uh-huh.
hard. Property management's really hard, and especially while you're working a job. So I modified my plan a little bit a couple years into it and realized that I was much better buying smarter and buying better deals. Like I'd rather have 40 properties that I was making $250 a door on than having 100
Mhm.
properties making $100 a door.
Yeah. Well, and also your margins there with $100 if there's some big
Spin,
a capital expense or something like that, like you think it's $1,200 a year, it's wiped out,
yep,
right?
pretty
And
quickly.
so definitely see that. Did you, Paul, I have a question for you. I love this, by the way, because um you're a really hard worker who can say you can come from anything and succeed in real estate. And too often I hear that, like, hey, it's not attainable, right?
Hmm.
And for you, 40 properties, that is impressive over 8 years. And so one of my questions for you is, I mean, you have a math and engineering degree. How meticulous were you in putting these in spreadsheets to find great deals and looking at your pro forma to say this is, my buy box and what I should
Hmm.
buy? How much of it was that, and how much of it would you say is like knowing the market, researching the market, being boots on the ground, and really understanding, hey, this could be a good deal if I rehab it and rent it?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, isn't it? It's like you want to
Mhm.
buy on the fundamentals. Like you want to be really confident that when you're buying a property, that there's going to be cash flow once you've got it rented out. I mean, that's the fundamental thesis behind my investment strategy is I want to buy
Yeah.
the stream of income. Just like if you're buying a business with real estate, all you're doing is buying a very specific type of business. And it happens to be a very easy business to understand in the scheme of things compared to most any other kind of business. We all understand what a property is. Like we've
Yeah.
lived, like one of the questions I ask when I speak sometimes is like, how many of you by raise of hands, raise your hands if you've lived in a mobile home, an apartment, or a house? And like everybody raises their hand, of course, because we've all lived in that. We understand
Yeah.
what it's like to, it's a basic fundamental need that we all have. And we understand the fit and finish and the features that make sense in a house. So there isn't that much to learn. And so in doing the math on, like figuring out the income stream and the expenses of a property really isn't that complicated. I mean, there's a few things you got to learn, but fundamentally, it's like the income minus expenses is the income, and then you got to factor. The hardest calculation is factoring in what your payment on the debt is going to be. You need a financial calculator
Hmm.
to figure out what your debt payment is. Everything else
Yep.
is just add and subtract, right? So the math is really not that much of a stretch, even for people who aren't, math inclined. So I think there's a certain degree of like just feeling comfortable with the numbers, which we can get past
Mhm.
people past pretty quickly. But then what you got to figure out is like I have the audacity to like go and buy a rental property that I'm in charge of. Like that's really I think what people have to get their head around. And how can I manage that from a distance, or how can I find these properties without going and looking at all that 100 properties myself?
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Now, you spoke about this lady who was 3 hours away, who was a
Hmm.
chemical engineer um in California, but then moved and retired in Arkansas.
Hmm.
You met with her. She gave you the money for your first property.
Hmm.
How did you get, I mean, 40 is impressive. How did you get the capital? And you also mentioned that you went to properties where, you were cash flowing 250 versus
Yeah.
$100. So was she part of that equation, or how did you think as you continue to grow and scale,
Hmm.
what the right strategy was for capital?
That's a good question because it's a limiting factor. No matter how much money you start with, if you buy enough real estate, you will run out of your own cash. Like you cannot
Hmm.
cash flow
Yeah,
fast enough to grow your portfolio more and more, especially at an exponential rate. So what do you do? Well, I learned this concept very early on is that you want to dig your well before you're thirsty. And you're going to need a source of capital that is cooperative and understands what you're doing, believes in you, and is willing to fund your deals in exchange for a return. And so that's a very important distinction that I like to talk about when raising capital. And I hear people say this a lot. It's like, she gave you $30,000. Let's be very clear. Like she didn't give me $30,000. She invested $30,000
that's
in
it.
exchange for a return on her money. And she used the asset as collateral in case I didn't perform.
Yeah, yeah,
Right. So very,
yeah,
it's a lot hard to say that than it is to say she gave me money. So it's a good shorthand people use. But when you're thinking about this for the first time, if you go hat in hand thinking that you're going to ask somebody to give you money, it's hard to make that ask. I'd like to look at it in a different way is, hey, Dana, I hear you're doing really well. I'm doing some projects in Arkansas. I've had some really good successes lately. I'm trying to buy some more properties. I'm offering my investors 10, 12% interest. Would you be interested in hearing more about that? And I would have that
yeah,
conversation over and over and over again. And I made it a point to where I would have that conversation once a day. And if I didn't, I would like stop, go into a convenience store and ask the clerk in front of me just to practice that in front of a
yeah.
real person.
You know what? I love that you just said that because I'm a product person. I'm not a salesperson. And when I did my first couple of, sales calls, it was actually very intimidating. In part because I I was thinking, oh, what if someone says no? And then you reverse it and you're like, no, actually, I have a great deal for them. Like I have a great product and service for them. They should want to use this, right? I'm not selling them something that doesn't work or isn't far superior than the competitors. And once you change that mindset, you're right. You go out and say, hey, your confidence suddenly changes because when you go into the room with an investor, you are saying, hey, this is a great deal and here's why your money is better invested in me versus anyone else. And part of that has to do with what I love is that you met with her in person. It's building that trust over time. It's how you present yourself. It's how you show, hey, based on the past, even if you haven't invested in real estate, based on the past of your sport, you know the numbers, you know the market, you work hard, all of this stuff that they can see that vision with you in the future. And you're right, you need to practice. You need to practice so many different times in order to understand what works and what doesn't. But everyone obviously listening to the Hemlane Hustle right now is a good person looking to make sure that they get a return for themselves as well as their investors. And so I love that of like not giving you money, but you know they're investing in you and they're investing with you. So that's great. So walk me through how many private money lenders that you went to, how many no's you got, how many yeses did you get, and like how many private money lenders were you working with at any given time?
Good question. So I probably was working with anywhere from 3 to 5 different private lenders over time. And I remember when I first started, finding the deals wasn't the challenge. Finding the money was the challenge. I spent more time cultivating those relationships, which does take time,
Mm-hmm.
than it was to find a deal, because I had wholesalers bringing me deal, and I was able to run the numbers very quickly and say yes, no, here's an offer. And I learned very early that the function of success in this business, or really any business, is how many times do you put your offer in front of somebody's face? Like that's
Mm-hmm.
the measure of success. And so Foot Locker has this really interesting concept that they used to use, that it was they built their empire brick by brick. And the brick that they chose to measure was very specific, and it was how many feet did they measure inside someone's store? Because they learned
Mm.
that when they measured someone's foot, the likelihood for them to buy was profoundly higher, like
Ah,
significantly higher. Even if a dad came in and brought his son to look at some shoes, they would measure the dad's foot as well, keep them in their portfolio or their repository of potential clients. And the likelihood of him buying a shoe during that event, even though he had no intention of buying a shoe, went up by a staggering number. So the principle there is find the leading metric that you can control. And in the real
yeah.
estate business, how many offers, written offers to a seller are you doing? Or for raising money, how many times have you had the in-person meeting with somebody saying, hey, I have this opportunity over here. Would you be interested in hearing more about how you can get involved?
Yeah, I love that. It's very similar on the product side. We think about North Star metrics. And North Star metrics should never be revenue or like what the outcome is. It's like what is the leading indicator? And for us at Hemlane, it's actually occupied units. And the reason it's occupied is we actually want to align with investors using the platform that not only do you have a property on the platform, but it's actually occupied. We helped you find a tenant because if it's not occupied, you're not making any cash flow, right? And so for us, it's the occupied units and on time payments, but occupied units with on time payments. And we find that if you follow that, then the units come. And I think it's very similar here, where it's like if you have enough of those in person conversations where people meet with you, the money will come. And I love that. And I think the hardest thing is getting out there and getting the process in place. But once you do, you feel much more comfortable with it, right, Paul? That it's like, okay, now it's a repeat process. I know how I got that private money lender. Now let me go and talk to the next, etc. So I love that. It's I think relationships are really key to success, but I also think you're right. People get very discouraged very easily. That like, oh hey, I haven't purchased enough properties, but that shouldn't be the North Star for you. It should be almost a leading indicator that you will get there. And it
Mhm.
also helps, I think, boost your confidence. So I love that about Foot Locker. I've never heard that before. That's really interesting. Great. Let's talk about, so we've spoken about capital, and I think you've given everyone here a lot of good insights on how to move from whether they have 2 rentals to 5 rentals to how are they going to get to 40 like you, Paul. Let's talk about just macro trends and like kind of back up from your real estate investing. You've obviously invested locally. You've also invested out of state in Texas. Tell us a little bit more about, from that perspective, what you're seeing with housing affordability, where you see the future going. Right now, I think it's 37%, 38%. It fluctuates of households are renter occupied, right? So
Mhm.
what's going on with housing affordability, and where do you think it's going in the future?
Well, we all know that housing affordability is a crisis. I think affordability in general is a crisis for a lot of people.
Hmm.
Inflation is real. It's here to stay, and it's recently been very high. We've been able to knock it down a little bit over the last couple of years, but that doesn't mean it's not still growing some. And in fact, we just got an update as of yesterday that the Fed probably isn't going to lower rates this year
Lower
because
rates.
they
Yeah.
got and some new news that the consumer price index was over 3% for the first time in a couple months. So the trend that or the expectation that people are like, oh, just wait a while and interest rates will go back to normal. Like this is the new normal. Like I don't think
Hmm.
interest rates are going back to 2 or 3% like they were. That was a small measure of time in the scheme of the history of money, and it was the lowest it ever was. And we don't want it there actually, right? It's actually probably not good for our economy to have interest maybe
Yeah.
money have that cheap, right? So, housing affordability is going to continue to be a struggle as long as we continue to make more people than we have units to fill. We're going to have a housing affordability problem. The U.S. has plenty of land, right? But we don't have enough of those lands that have been, enough of that land that has been improved so people can move into, so to knock down the supply of these units that are in demand. So demand is high, supply is low. Basic econ 101 is going to tell you that prices are going to go back up. And if and when they ever do lower rates, even a little bit, more and more people will be able to afford to buy a property. And so the demand will go up even more for a still limited supply. And so a lot of people are locked in right now from the single family market. Most people in the US have an interest rate of 5% or less. Many people have 3 to 4% or less. And there's this lock-in effect that there's no reason to sell your house. I'm in an interest rate
Yeah.
right now of 3.875 locked in for 40 years. I'm in no rush to pay that off, right? There's no reason to.
Hmm.
I'm in no rush to move out of my house, even though there's a situation that we would consider moving if the cost of money was lower right now. But that's just the reality that we face and most people in the US face. So the amount of people that are putting their house on the market is just not good. What we are finding locally, and when I sell some of my units as I turn my units over, is that affordable housing, when you put on the market right now, is just flying off the market. Anything that's above the median house rate, median sales price for our region, is not moving very quickly because so few people can afford in Little Rock
Hmm.
$300,000 or $400,000 house.
Yeah. And I think even those who can afford it, they think financially that may not be a good decision. You almost
Right,
get comfortable in your house and you say, great, what would make me happy? Maybe I just renovate my kitchen. Yeah, I would love to move somewhere else, but I'm locked into a 3% interest rate. So why don't I just go ahead? It's a great deal for me. Why don't I go ahead and renovate or put an ADU in my backyard or whatever it is? And
right.
so I definitely hear and see that of people talking about that. And it will be interesting to see, I think, in the next, like, I think everyone was shocked with interest rates.
Hmm.
And they shouldn't have been. They should have known that they were artificially way too low. And to your point, it was, I think there was a lot of activity that was happening that shouldn't, because with interest rates so low, it's basically like free money, especially here in Silicon Valley, with like people investing in startups and these startups that didn't really make sense, right?
Right.
And this grow at all costs. I think it's good. We're back to fundamentals now. But at the same time, to your point, Paul, I do think that in affordability is always going to be a problem. You're always going to see the gap widening between the classes and the middle class. How do you bring more people into the middle class is going to be a challenging problem that all of us are going to have to face, particularly the government. But what's going to be interesting is in like 2 to 3 years, the question is going to be what types of people decide to make that decision. Okay, I'm going to go into a higher interest rate, or do more people just continue to say, great, I'll renovate, I'll stay in what I have because they're locked into that under 5%. And we're not expecting, interest rates at any time soon to go there. Great. Now let's go ahead and talk about, I want to kind of shift topics here and talk about single family versus multifamily. And
Hmm.
I'm a huge advocate of telling everyone start with single family. Part of it also has to do with tenants and tenant drama. I always tell people when you do a duplex, do side by side. There's less noise if they're, stacked on top. But the good thing about doing single family is then you're also having less of like yard work to do because you can say, great, it's your yard, you take care of it.
Hmm.
When there's communal space, there's just slightly more that you need to do. And so from that perspective, say start with single family. A lot of them are also accidental landlords where it's a property they used to own.
Yeah.
And then they say, great, I was locked into 3% interest rate, so let me keep it. But I do think when you think about building up your portfolio faster and then also hedging, where if you start with one single family property and it's 100% vacant, you have zero cash flow. If you have a duplex, a fourplex, a 20plex, you can sort of hedge all of that and not everything falls onto having, one tenant. Walk me through, you went from single family to multifamily. Walk me through your thoughts and experience of doing that. You had that first property that you used the BRRRR method on. Walk me through that, and do you ever think someone should start in multifamily, or do you think everyone should start in single family, very similar to what you did?
Great question. So every asset class has fundamental pros and cons. And so instead of arguing about what asset class is the best, it depends a lot on the person and their goals. So I think you back up a little bit and say, what are your personal goals as an investor? And
Mhm.
if you just want a couple of properties to maybe knock down some of your earned income from taxes or from depreciation, and you just want a project to work on the side, and you want to do the work yourself, single family is great. If you want to build an empire and you want to have 1,000 units under your control and be Grant Cardone, you're probably going to scale up to multifamily. So it depends on your personal preference. And so the avatar that I tend to work with the most, and I think is probably what you guys work with the most, it's a busy professional that is
Mhm.
looking for that typically has pretty good income, they have good credit, and they want to improve their financial situation somehow, right? They may not be looking to get out of their job like I was. They're just trying to improve their net worth and own some assets. I think it's a very smart thing to do. And they believe in the thesis, the fundamentals of owning residential property, whether it be single or multifamily. They want to own a piece of asset that's offering a fundamental need for humanity. That's what you're doing when you're buying residential,
Yep.
whether it be single family or multifamily. Then you decide, okay, am I in a situation where I can find a deal? And I think there's actually less competition in multifamily. There's a lot more competition in single family because there's less people that make that jump. So even
Mhm.
doing a twoplex or threeplex or fourplex, you still get the benefits of single family loan products, the non-commercial
Yeah.
loan products, right?
Non-commercial.
But you can scale faster. So if you're thinking about scaling, that's when I tend to think, going from a few single families to the duplex, the triplex, the quadplex makes a lot of sense. And then once you get your feet wet, you understand the fundamentals of what it's like to own a small multifamily versus a single family. There are differences. You're like, okay, now I'm looking to scale up. Now I'm looking for an 8, 20 unit. And if and when you're ready to scale, that's when you look for that.
Yeah, I think that's great. I love that. And going back again to your goals where you see yourself and putting that target in, very
Yeah.
similar to you what you did when you left your job. It's so great. Now I want to ask you just three questions as part of a lightning round
Mhm.
here. What is the biggest mistake you made in real estate investing?
The biggest mistake I did in real estate investing before starting was waiting so long to start. There's an old saying in real estate to uh, don't wait and buy real estate, buy real estate and wait. And so I believe fundamentally in dollar cost averaging into assets, including real estate right now. The biggest mistake I made as a real estate investor once I had properties was not effectively delegating property management. I found that real estate and business management is actually pretty easy. Managing people is not. And
Yeah.
so if you're not the person for that, then you're probably better to delegate that out to somebody who's a pro.
Great. What is the best moment you've ever had in your real estate investing career?
Well, it's a funny statement, but I was laid off from my job. 2 years into my 3-year career, I was laid off. It was a little bit shocking. I wasn't terribly surprised, but I did not actually see it coming. And I was able to call my wife and say, I just got laid off, honey. I think we'll be fine, but just want to let you know when will you be the first to know after I found out. And she said, well, I'm scared, but honey, you've been planning for this. It's going to be okay. And I had been planning for this. I didn't need to go and find another job because I had income that I was already setting up my family to live off of from the assets that I'd purchased. And that job wasn't actually necessary anymore. So I didn't go and find a replacement job. I just became a full-time real estate investor.
Okay, great. Then let me ask you final question. Prediction for the next hot city. Do you think there is one, or every city has something to offer there?
That's an interesting question. So there are all these um, situations where people put up these lists of properties where's the next hot or what's the best
Mhm.
investment property or market to invest in. And I fundamentally disagree with that. That makes for really good headlines, right? That's interesting to write
Yeah,
about. As an investor, you're not looking for the next hot city. You don't want to own 10 properties in 10 different cities. You're probably going to find a market that you understand the most, that you feel confident that you can find a discount in, because you're going to make money in real estate when you buy. And so you want to buy into a property that you know you're getting a discount. I fundamentally believe in that. And then it's reasonable to want to buy into a rising tide scenario. And so it's reasonable to ask that question, but there's usually a rising tide in every major metro city somewhere. Find the market that has a growing population and find a place where there's a lot of jobs, and then find where they're putting in the next Tesla plant or the next Amazon retail store or something, right? Something that's going to grow and add a lot of jobs, and put your house or buy a house in the area where the growth is happening in a region you understand.
I love that. I think micro trends are just as important as the macro trends.
Mhm.
To your point, and every single city has something where it's a certain part of the market that is growing. I once actually heard, if you have Starbucks or Whole Foods there, it's already too late. But if you can find these places where there's a pet store, a local health food store, this and that,
Mhm.
certain things that would be even like the Amazon's about to go into there or whatever it may be, then you can jump into there. And so I think really understanding your market is incredibly important. And also, once you do make that first investment, you'll be smarter with the second, third, fourth, fifth. So if you can
Mhm.
double it down in one market, that makes sense. Well, Paul, thank you so much for being on the Hemlane Hustle today. If listeners want to reach out to you to learn more about what you do, your syndication, your direct investments,
Mhm.
how can they contact you?
Yeah, the best place to find me is on my website, pauldavidthompson.com. I've cursed with a common name, so I had to use all three of them to get my own domain. So pauldavidthompson.com, and I'm also at Paul David Thompson in most every social platform.
Wonderful. Well, Paul, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.